$7 a year.
Okay. You just go back and make it full screen.
Or you can go online.
I'm not sure if you're sharing at all, but I see nothing but a white screen on this side.
All right, Ralph.
I'm going to thank you. I'll take your money tonight.
I saw 4 people online.
Pretty good.
Okay, you've got to go and you got to screen share that because you're still screen sharing PowerPoint.
All right, Ralph.
So screen share.
You're good.
You're fine. Go and yep.
I see nothing but a white screen right now, guys.
We got
There it goes.
All right. So share screen.
Top of my head.
Let me see if this works,
well,
John.
what you have to do? No. Go back to share again.
Yeah.
Share and go to. You got to share.
I like the way you.
I guess
Oh, I got us.
just share screen.
We did it one ago.
Oh yeah, there you go. Now
Okay.
page. Yeah. Pick which one you want to see us. I'll tell the
We assume
program.
everybody
Yeah.
wants to buy one.
There you go. That's it.
All right.
That's it. Is it?
Mo better.
Yep.
Yay.
Make it full screen.
Make it full screen.
Down at the bottom, full screen.
Can you make it full screen?
I thought I just did.
I thought you just did too.
It shows up fine for me now.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
That's the only one that matters.
Is he screen sharing within screen sharing?
Okay. How many people are interested in buying a telescope? Never had one.
Never had one.
Well,
I'm always interested.
Count the people out that already have telescopes. You've never had one. Okay, so we have a few. Okay, good. Okay, things you need to know before you buy your first telescope. It's not power, okay?
Oh, gee.
Why is it not working, Kevin? I'm on. Because I was pushing the button the wrong way. Okay, so what we're going to talk about tonight, am I ready for a telescope? Avoiding hobby killers. What can I see? Tempering my expectations. Things to know about telescopes and some example telescopes. I have one here on the floor. And then we'll have a question and answer period. I'll try to answer your questions. Okay, so the secret of happiness, telescope happiness, is not buying the biggest, baddest telescope, but buying the one that's easy and fun to use, or the one that you will use and not have it in a corner with spider webs on it. Okay. Am I ready for a telescope? So questions to ask yourself. Am I an armchair astronomer? So am I content just to sit at home, read magazines, read astronomy magazines, read astronomy books, watch YouTube programs on astronomy, Google questions about astronomy, because God, it's cold outside, or the mosquitoes are terrible, or it's damp, and I don't know what's in the dark walking around behind me. So I would just rather sit here in my easy chair and stay where I can get a drink anytime I want it, or go potty or whatever. Okay. Or am I a visual astronomer? I can't wait to get a telescope because I want to try to find those deep, dark, fuzzy objects. I want to see the moon. I want to see planets. I just can't. I just desire really looking through a telescope. Am I want to be astrophotographer? The reason and we'll talk about this in just a minute. So things to ask yourself: what do I know about the night sky? So I don't have a telescope. So what do I really know about the night sky and how it works? What do I know about the moon? And do I know where the moon is going to be when it's first quarter? Do I know where the moon's going to be when it's full? Do I know when the moon's going to come up? If the moon comes up at 8 o'clock tonight, when's it going to come up tomorrow night? Do I know where the major planets are? Can I point them out? Can I go outside and say, there's Jupiter, or there's Saturn, or Mars, or whatever? Do I know any of the constellations? Can I point them out? So when I go outside, and the reason I ask this is because every day when I go to the 3 days that I do work, when I go outside like this morning, I look up and just see what I can see before I get in the truck. Anytime it's dark and I walk outside, in fact, I'll be sitting watching TV and I'll get up and go out on the deck. My wife will say, well, what are you doing? I'm just checking, just looking, just to see what I can see, because there are all kinds of things that you can see with your naked eye or a pair of binoculars in the sky. It's a great thing. I love it. Okay, so now one of the things that we hear the most from people that say, I want to buy a telescope because I want to take pictures. That's the one thing we hear almost everybody. So is that what your desire is? Is that your main goal? Is I want to be able to take pictures. I don't really care about looking through the telescope. I just want to be able to take pictures. So do you want to take pictures like this? And let me qualify these, because these are from Richard and John Sadler. These are straight out of their telescope. They're not processed or anything. This came straight out of the telescope. So if this is what you want to do, and this is your goal, this is all you want to do, you don't care anything about visual astronomy, do you really need a telescope? Or would you be better off buying one of these, spending $500 on either a dwarf or a sea star, because those pictures right there are straight out of a dwarf and straight out of a sea star.
Pretty good.
Without processing. So there's you $500. All you need beyond that is either your cell phone or an iPad, and you're in business. Now, if you want to process those pictures, yeah, it's going to take a little bit more. You're going to have a computer and some more things to do it. But if this is your goal, if this is all you want to do, then our problem is solved. The end. Thank you for coming. Okay? Now, I could be shot for saying what I just said, because some people think that those things are evil, or they're not worth the money.
Real astronomers don't use
Real astronomers don't use those. But Bob King, who writes for Sky and Telescope, I love his writing. He said the same thing. He said, I despise these things. I hate them until I bought one. And he says now, and he listed a whole bunch of things that he said that you can do. And he said, this is not really a bad piece of equipment. Okay. So, no, I do want a telescope. I don't want to just take pictures. I want to be able to see through a telescope. I want to have a telescope so I can look at things. I don't want to. I'm really not interested in taking pictures, but I do want to look at the night sky. I want to look at the moon. I want to look at planets. I want to see the deep fuzzies, whatever. So if that's what you want to do, so if you want to buy a telescope, here's some things to remember. Don't rush into buying. Don't do an impulse buy, because every time I've done an impulse buy, I'm sitting looking at what I just bought thinking, why did I buy that? Or what am I going to do with it? Maybe I didn't think through this all the way. So do your homework and use reliable sources, because there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet that it's just personal opinions, and they're not based on anything other than their opinion. Go to star parties. Come to our star parties and look at the equipment. If you don't see what you're thinking about buying, ask questions. Ask one of us, because among these guys here, if we haven't had the telescope, or we haven't touched it at a telescope workshop, or we haven't helped somebody with it, we can at least tell you something about a telescope or about what we see and help you make a decision. We're not going to tell you what to buy. We're not going to say, yeah, you've got to buy this over this. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make some suggestions. It's going to have to be your decision. Buy from a reliable telescope dealer. That means not Walmart, not Target, not Kohl's. I even saw the other day that you can buy a Celestron telescope through Home Depot. Home Depot is not a telescope dealer, and I hate to say it, but Amazon is not either. Okay? That's just my personal opinion. There are some things that you can buy for telescopes on Amazon, but I prefer to tell you to buy from a dealer So if you have problems or if you have questions, you can call the dealer and say, hey, because most of the dealers you talk to, the people that are answering their questions are people that have been in astronomy for a while, can answer questions about telescopes, or can help you.
Ralph,
And remember, there is no one perfect telescope.
another viable option if you don't absolutely have to have a brand new telescope is hang around with this bunch.
Yeah, because I have a 10-inch telescope at the house right now that I'm refurbishing. It was given to the club. Like Kevin said a minute ago, we have a 16-inch that we don't know what to do. There's a couple of 6-inch telescopes that we'd be glad to give somebody. So there are telescopes around. Cloudy nights. I'm sorry.
Do you have a list of what you would consider reliable dealers?
We'll get there.
Okay.
Hang on. Okay. So before we go anywhere else, what can I see with my telescope? Tempering my expectations, because there are things that if you have never looked through a telescope, or if you're not that familiar with what you can and cannot see in a telescope, and you've looked at magazines or books, you may have expectations of things that you can see, but in fact, you're not going to be able to see. So Jupiter, if you're expecting to see Jupiter like this,
You need to buy a Hubble.
you need to buy a Hubble.
Now you can do that with a C star. No, no.
That's not what you said the other day, John.
No, you get about
I quizzed you about it.
you get about 10 or 15 pixels across.
Okay, this is what you're going to see. And this is probably just a little bit brighter than what you would normally see.
That's still good.
That's still good. That was a picture I took a few years ago. Okay, if you want to see Saturn like this, again, you need to buy a Hubble. And right now, you're not going to see that because the rings are closed. Where it's in its part of the orbit right now, the rings are almost aligned across the middle of the planet.
This is pretty cool too.
You're going to see this. And this was taken a few years ago, and the rings were wide open then. We just heard this in a club meeting 2 or 3 months ago, someone that had just joined saying, I want to see color in the nebula. Okay. This is a Matt Harbison picture that he took in Texas here just a few months ago. And I've narrowed down, but it was a very large, but this is about what you're going to see in a telescope visually, size-wise. Let me qualify that size-wise, but this is what you're going to see. You're going to see black and white, and this is not the telescope's fault. This is your body, because your eyes, the cells in your eyes that you use in the dark are good for seeing low light conditions or seeing in low light conditions, but they do not see color. Now, if you see a brighter star that is colored, that will show up because then your cones come back into play. If you're looking at the planet Jupiter, yeah, you'll be able to see the rust color of the cloud bands. Saturn, you may get just a little bit of color out of it, but nothing spectacular. You will not see this in any nebula. I don't care how big the telescope is, of anything that you can buy, you won't see that. How many times have we been asked at a star party, can you see the flag on the moon? Okay. This picture was taken with the NASA Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. It's orbiting about 30 miles, give or take a little bit, 30 miles above the moon. Okay, so it's orbiting between, let's say, here in Cleveland. There you can see the Apollo 11 lander. And from the research I've seen, upper left of the lander, the flag is right there somewhere. Okay, but that's 30 miles away. We're 240,000 miles away. Okay.
So similar to that.
Similar to that. But I will say this, the moon, you're never disappointed when you look at the moon. There's always something to see on the moon. You can spend hours just like what Jack Pitt can talks about taking his Dobbs and putting it on the moon and not keeping up with the moon, just letting the moon drift through. He said, I pretend like that I'm on an orbiter flying across the moon and the moon's flying. So yes, there's always something to see on the moon. It is a very interesting place. So it never disappoints. Okay, what can you see with a moderate sized beginner telescope? The moon, we just talked about, the major planets, even Uranus and Neptune. They're tiny, yes, but in my 8-inch, you can. Did you all see it? Or did you leave Sunday night before we put it on Neptune? It is tiny, but you can tell it has surface area to it, and you can tell that it has a bluish green cast to it. But it's tiny. As the UTC student said down at the park, at the battlefield, is that all it is? Yeah, it is. You can see hundreds of open clusters and globular clusters, numerous bright nebula, planetary nebulas, many galaxies. You can see the sun with proper filtration. And I will emphasize proper filtration. Never look at the sun with a telescope or binoculars or even your eyes for that matter without proper filtration, because you will permanently damage your eyes. Okay. And let me emphasize this, because somebody at the Star Party Saturday night told me they had one of the old 60 millimeter telescopes that has like the round welder type filter that goes under the eyepiece. If you have any of those old telescopes around, take that filter and take a hammer and crush it, because that filter is absolutely dangerous. Avoiding hobby killers. Now, Jerry Olteon, in an article back in December 2019, coined this phrase, and basically he did a whole article about sort of what I'm talking about tonight and some other things. Telescopes that are so frustrating to use that you decide astronomy isn't any fun and you quit. So those are good examples right there of hobby killer telescopes. So what do you look for? The first thing you look for is if they're selling by power. If they're saying this is 600 power, 400 power, then go on to another telescope, because that's the first key that tells me that that's a junk telescope, because it is not power, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. If they're showing you pictures of Jupiter with a cell phone, then this, you know where that picture came from. It's probably Hubble or one of the orbiters. The color pictures here, and you're going to do that with your cell phone on that little telescope right there with no clock drive. Any of the astrophotographers in here can tell you real quick that ain't going to work. So things like that. I mean, this right here, they didn't look to see that if you look, the power is reversed on those two images right there. Okay, this is not a bashing of Amazon or Walmart, but it's a very good place to find junk telescopes. Stay away from real small equatorial mounts on little spindly leg tripods, or telescopes that are on out-azimuth mounts with no slow motion controls, telescopes that are on camera tripods with no slow motion controls. You may be able to find something in them, but you will not be able to keep it in the telescope for any length of time. So stay away from those. Stay away from this telescope. Anybody that has worked with us in one of the telescope workshops, new telescope workshops, this telescope keeps showing up every year. At least one person. Last year we had 2 of them. Every year we have at least one. The optics in this telescope is called Jones bird, or Bird Jones. And if you look, it says the focal length is 1,000 millimeters. If you convert that into inches, it's 39.4 inches. Right down here, it tells you the tube is 18 inches long.
How's that work?
Wait a minute. That means the focal length is over twice as long as the tube. So how do they do that? They add some lenses into the focuser to, number one, correct for a spherical mirror that you'll learn about in just a minute. They add more lenses in there to compress that focal length down so it'll fit in that 18-inch tube. The optics are normally crap, to say the least, and I hate to say it, this is Celestron, but it's not Celestron as Celestron. It's the mother company, Sena, in China, saying, we're going to put this name on the telescope. Sorry, we're the boss. So the reason we see them is because it's a good deal. It's $279 on Amazon on a go-to mount. And I've also heard that go-to mount is not very reliable either. But if you see that, don't buy it, because you can't collimate the telescope without disassembling the focuser, pulling those lenses out, collimating the telescope, and then try to put the lenses back in the focuser without messing your collimation up. And it took us 2 years before we figured out how to do it. So I think year before last was the first year that we actually were able to collimate one at one of the telescope workshops.
What's collimation?
Last year we did too. We'll get there. Okay, this is the telescope I have here is the example telescope. This is one that I bought my granddaughter. When it first came out, if you look at the box, there's no false promises here. There's nothing about power. There's nothing on here, no pictures that are nothing to say that you can take pictures with this, with your cell phone or anything. There is a cell phone in there, but what it is, there's an app used on the cell phone that it utilizes the camera in the cell phone to do what's called plate solving. So it's taking pictures of the sky and it's helping you locate objects by plate solving and helping you align on that object. And I can say, and there's some people here that watched us at the Star Party, it does work. I don't like the mount because this is one of the first mounts they came out with, and it is an out-azimuth mount, and it's a 5-inch telescope, and the way that the size of the tube versus the tripod, there's about a 10 or 15 degree circle straight up at the zenith that you cannot point that telescope to because the tube hits the tripod. So you have to wait until the object, rotates on over toward the west so you can see it. It's not a big deal. Everything else works. But the little telescope there on the corner, the next year, I think this one has been discontinued, although you do still see them in stock at some of the telescope dealers. But they changed it to a Dobbs mount, and now you don't have that problem. Excuse me. Things to know about telescopes. Okay, a telescope collects light, and it either uses a lens or a mirror to bend that light and bring it to a focus. So you can see there the light coming in comes through the lens, it bends, it comes down, it comes to a focus point, and then the eyepiece is just a magnifier that magnifies that lens or that object. So here I took my little 4.5-inch telescope, I turned it on the moon, I put a piece of tracing paper over the focuser, I racked in until I found the focus point of the moon. So that is actually the image of the moon at at the focus point of the telescope. So all you would have to do there is take a magnifying glass and magnify that image. On tracing paper, it's not going to be all that good, but normally there'd be an eyepiece there that would magnify the image. So that's all the telescope does. Aperture, not magnification. So this is a good illustration here that Obsession Telescopes has on their website. I claimed it. Now they're trying to sell you large telescopes, but they're trying to show you as you increase the diameter of the telescope, how the object that you're looking at, which is M13, the Hercules cluster, you can see each time you go up in size of the telescope, the image gets brighter and you see more detail in the image. So the more light you gather, the brighter the object is going to be, and the more detail you can see, our resolution. So I like to think of a telescope as a funnel. So you can take this funnel and put it out into rain, and this funnel here is going to gather a lot more rain than this is. So all you're doing is gathering the photons, and you're funneling those photons into your eye. Same thing a telescope does. Bigger is better? Yeah, to a point. So don't get aperture fever right off. And you start going, if you've got the money to do it, don't go for the bigger and bigger and bigger telescopes, because you have to think, where am I going to store this telescope?
How you gonna transport it?
How you going to, is it going to fit in your car? Is it going to fit in your truck? Right, Jim?
Yeah, right.
And when it's in the back of your truck and you get caught in a rainstorm,
F-150 is a good start.
will you be able to move the telescope by yourself? It's a big thing. Got to think about that, because my Celestron CPC, as we talked about Sunday night, is getting almost to the point that I'm not happy moving that 46-pound telescope at 76 years old. So I may end up having to buy something different if I want to stay on with it. Can you set the telescope up by yourself? So I like this illustration that Orion Telescope has, because they're comparing all their different telescopes to a 6-foot tall person. And remember, what is your budget? Because the bigger the telescope, the more money it's going to cost you. So there's 3 main types of telescopes: refractors, reflectors, and catadioptric. A refractor, anybody that has a refractor, and it's a good quality refractor, anytime you look through a refractor, you'll know that they are just beautiful images. So it's the best performing per inch. It's using lenses to make the light cone and bring the light to a focus. It's pre-rigid construction. It's a sealed tube, as long as the eyepiece is in it. Usually needs no adjustment, as long as you take care of it and you don't drop it like you know who. It's quick cool down. So, but it's higher cost, because there are, in a doublet, there are 4 different curves that have to match perfectly to get that telescope to work properly. And they charge you for all the figuring they have to do. The tube is usually longer, unless you get a short focal length, but the eyepiece is on the back end of the telescope, and you have to have either a higher tripod or you have to sit down like Matt does. Things to look for, and this is very important, because I have 2 pieces of crap at my house right now that I paid good money for. One that the company did replace the lens, and John Sadler has one just like mine that they had to replace the lens. It took me over a year to figure out what was going on, but chromatic aberration is a very important thing to look for. Galileo's telescope had a single lens in it, and if you look, you can see that the red, blue, and green light do not come to the same focus point. So anytime you look through one of those telescopes, you're going to have a halo, or it's going to look like a rainbow around the edge of the object. So I think it was in the 1700s they came up with a method where they put a second lens in there to help bring those colors into focus. So they did that until into the early 80s, I think it was, and there were some guys came up with what we call apochromatic. So they added another lens. They also used different glass with different refraction characteristics to bring all the colors to a focus. So if you buy a telescope, you buy especially apochromatic, and you start looking through that, and you start seeing like blue halos around around stars, around the brighter stars, best thing you can do is call who you bought it from and start talking to their warranty department about maybe you want a new telescope. Don't wait till the telescope goes out of warranty and then decide it's not good. You can buy a doublet that's apochromatic. They've done that now because of the newer glasses that are available. Most of them are triplet, quadruplet, even up to a sextuplet, depending on the design of the lens. And each time they add a lens, the price goes up because there are more surfaces in there that they have to figure. But watch for the chromatic aberration because that is a big deal. Now, a doublet, if you're just using for visual and you don't look for the chromatic aberration that you would get in a pretty decent lens, because there's a lot of doublet lenses out there that are good. Even the doublet on the telescope upstairs is fine. If you're doing photography, that's where it's going to get you.
Unless you use a monochrome sensor and filters. But
Yes. Well, and still monochrome though, when you get into the blue light, is going to fuzz. It's going to.
You just have to refocus for each color.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But it's not ideal by any means.
Hey John, I've got a lens I'll sell you. Okay.
Talking about from that Sharp Star?
No, the other one.
Oh, okay.
The other Sharp Star that I have. Okay, reflectors. They use a lens or a mirror, a concave mirror, to bring the light to a focus. So there's only one surface that has to be figured, so they're low cost. It's a simple design, easy to adjust, modify, view from the top of the tube, so it's higher, so you can use a lower tripod, unless it's an old cave telescope. They're quick cool down, and some even have fans that you can put a battery on and cool them down even faster. They do require periodic adjustment, collimation, which we'll just talk about in just 1 second. The tubes are open, and you need to cover the tubes up because spiders for some reason, they love the inside of reflecting telescopes. Usually larger tubes per inch. Of course, if the mirror is larger, the tube is going to be larger. Okay, in a mirror reflector, you want to look for spherical aberration. So if you're looking at a telescope and it doesn't say that it's a parabolic mirror, it's probably a spherical mirror. And the only way you can get by with a spherical mirror in a telescope is to have a very long focal length, like f10 or above. And hardly anybody makes an f10 reflector anymore because the tubes are just too long. So what you see is the light from the edge of the mirror versus the center of the mirror. They come to different focal points. So what you have to do, you have to correct the mirror, turn it into a parabola. So you have to drop the center of the mirror down. So now it brings the focus that from the center out here back to the focus so they all focus at the same point. The adjustment is collimation. It's not a big deal. Most of us use a laser collimator now, and it's something that you can do in a matter of minutes. But if you don't collimate, you'll see your stars will be drawn, look like little bitty comets or other things. So all you're doing is just centering, making sure all your optics are centered on each other. And that's what the laser is helping you do. So this is perfect collimation here. If you have a telescope like Jim's that's in a hard tube, you may not have to collimate every single time. Check it. If you have one that has a truss where the top comes off of the mirror box, you'll have to collimate that every time you put it together. But again, I have a telescope like that. It's not that big of a deal. You just get used to it, learn how to do it, and it doesn't take any time. Catadioptric. Celestron, used to have one in here. Celestron, if anybody's seen my scope, it uses lenses and mirrors to form the focus point. And the way the design is that you can actually fold the optics over one more time. So it comes through the corrector plate in the front. It goes to the main mirror, reflects up to a secondary mirror that has a curve on it. reflects from that down to the center of the mirror. And then here they're using a diagonal mirror to bring it out so you can see it, so you're not having to look through the center. Very similar to the telescope up above, upstairs. So you have Schmidt-Casio grains or you have Mexitoffs. You can see the difference here in the corrector plate. And it's just a different design. But you see both of these telescopes on the market now. Celestron, I think Celestron sells both of these. Skywatcher uses the Maxitoff. So most compact tube for inch, so they're very short. So you have an 8-inch telescope that's 2,000 millimeter focal length that instead of being that long is like this long. Short tube, easy to mount. Eyepiece height varies the least of any of them. It's a seal tube. Disadvantage, fairly high cost because they do have multiple surfaces that they have to figure. Requires periodic collimation. Now, I've had my telescope for 15 years. To be honest with you, I have never really checked it, but I have never had any problems with collimation. But it has been taken care of. Longest cool down. I remember an image in Astronomy Magazine years ago about cooling your telescopes down, and they had a cartoon showing a Schmidt-Casio grain telescope, and there was a thunderstorm going on inside the tube, which sometimes you feel like that's the way it is. Okay, eyepieces are just magnifying glasses. So to find out what the power of the telescope is, you divide the focal length of the telescope by the focal length of the eyepiece. So if you have a 900 millimeter telescope, focal length telescope with a 25 millimeter eyepiece, it's a 36 power. So 900 divided by 25. 900 divided by 10 millimeter eyepiece is a 90 millimeter or 90x. So the longer focal length are lower power eyepiece or lower power telescopes, shorter, more power. Always use a low power eyepiece to search for targets. You can always change the eyepiece out to go to higher after you find it. Don't get a telescope, and a lot of telescopes are sold with a 25 and a 10 millimeter eyepiece. Don't put the 10 millimeter eyepiece in to try to find the moon or a planet, because it's going to make it
And
10 times as hard.
I just wanted to say one terminology. This always messed me up when I got started. The X at the end of the 36, that's power. That means power.
Times.
But it's power. So when he says 36 power, 36X, same thing.
Yeah. More power is not better. Okay, so you have a nice, crisp image of Saturn out there on the end, which that's the way I like it. Notice how bright it is and how nice detailed it is. But if you go more on power, let's say this is 4 times more, then you're spreading that light out over a wider area, so the image gets dimmer because now the light is spread out over an area 4 times more of what you had. When you add more, then you spread that out even more. Plus, you're magnifying all the atmosphere between here and outer space, all the moisture, all the air currents, all the dust, all the crap, all the smoke. That's being magnified also. So I like to do the first image. If you ever look through one of my telescopes at Saturn, you'll see a very small Saturn, but it's nice, pretty crisp, as best as I can make it. So as you increase, the field of view gets smaller, the image gets dimmer and fuzzier. So the rule of thumb that usable power is 50x or 50 power per inch or 2 power per millimeter. So if you have a 4.5 millimeter telescope, 50 power, 250 power is the maximum you can use with that telescope. An 80 millimeter telescope times 2, 160 power is the maximum user. Anything above that, when they advertise 600 power, that telescope will go to 600 power because they're giving you a Barlow, they're giving you an eyepiece, a very small, short eyepiece, theoretically it will go there, but you can't use it because it's empty magnification is the term they use. Eyepieces. Okay, there are all kinds of different, and this is just illustration I found of all these different types of eyepieces. Kellner up here is probably in the less expensive eye or telescopes. You're probably going to get Kellner lenses or Plössl lenses. Plössl is a good lens. It is probably the most economical lens that you can get. But nowadays, you'll see some of these higher dollar eyepieces that give you 100, 120 degree apparent field of view. So if you're thinking of what is this, it's how much of field of view am I looking at? So if I'm looking at a 50 degree, then basically it's 25 degrees either side of center line. So I'm looking at an image like this. If I'm looking at 120, when I look in the eyepiece, it's like you can look around in the eyepiece like that. And it's just amazing what you can see. But when you do that, you're adding a whole bunch more surfaces. And if you look at the price, they're worth it. If you have the money, they're worth it. I'm telling you, they are beautiful to look through. But get your pocketbooks ready because they can get very expensive. So common eyepieces, the 9.65 inch, you don't see that often anymore, but used to. That was what came with most of all the telescopes. And if you look at what you had to look through, they're tiny. I have no idea how they ground those lenses. The 1.25 eyepieces, that's the most common. There are 2-inch eyepieces, which you see a lot of us use. Also, if the telescope will take 2-inch eyepieces, they're nice to have. 1.25 is the one that you can get the most of. So if you have one of the older telescopes with the 0.965, nobody sells those eyepieces.
Hey, I've got a Beta Zoom eyepiece too. That's
Yeah.
real handy.
Right.
That's what I was going to say. That's a good multi-purpose eyepiece for visual.
And what they're saying is there are zoom eyepieces. Look for a good one. Beta is good. But you have one eyepiece and you can actually, it has click stops and you can
Go from
turn it.
from 8 to 24.
So,
Yeah.
And it's easy that way. You don't have to change eyepieces out.
And that's about a $350 eyepiece, so it's still
Yeah.
not cheap.
Yeah. Common telescope mounts out azimuth. So you have one axis that's horizontal, the other axis altitude from horizon to the zenith. Or you have an equatorial. This is German equatorial, called them gem mounts, that you have one axis pointed to the celestial north, and that's your right ascension axis. You have the declination axis, it's 90 degrees to that. Understand that when you're using it, if you buy a German equatorial and you're using it visually, when you turn to an object and you have the eyepiece in the right place, easy to look at. If you go to some other part of the sky, you may have to loosen the rings up on the tube and rotate the tube, or you're going to be looking upside down. That's one disadvantage of a German equatorial, but they're great. They're great mounts. They've been around for years. And always remember that a great telescope on an unstable, shaky mount is a major hobby killer because that will kill you. The Dobsonian mount, John Dobson. How am I doing on time? I'm already okay. John was a monk in a monastery, and he had no money, but he loved building telescopes, and he would sneak out and find junk that he could make telescopes out of. And the story says that the first mirror that he ground, he used the bottom of a glass bottle. He was in San Francisco, and he would find salvage porthole glass off of ships, and he ground mirrors out of that. finally, because he kept sticking out of the monastery, he got kicked out. And so he was on the street for a long time. But anyway, the San Francisco Sidewalk Astronomers started around him. They built all kinds of telescopes using this simple mount that he designed, which was just a modified out-azimuth mount that he found and made out of junk. But he started showing up at star parties, and they would go to Yosemite with these telescopes with that old bus, and he'd show up and he'd have a star party. He would go to the Riverside Telescope meet, which they were Riverside Telescope makers meet. And when they first showed up, the guys thought, that's stupid. Nobody wants a telescope like that because it doesn't have a drive, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. And then they started looking through the telescopes and realizing that, maybe this isn't all that bad after all. The mount caught on. I've been through the whole thing, from seeing it from the beginning, even building my own. And it was amazing how that mount just took over the market. And we went from grinding a 6-inch mirror, and if you had a 12-inch mirror back in those days, that was awesome. Now a 12-inch mirror is commonplace. I mean, 12, you hardly ever see a 6-inch telescope that much anymore. But it's amazing how it's taken over the market. Okay. I am not going to tell you what kind of telescope to buy. These are not recommended telescopes. These are just telescopes that I saw on High Point Scientific, and I just downloaded pictures of them just to show you some examples. One thing before we get into this, the market has changed big in the past few years. In 2023, the largest OPT was, right, Dennis and Matt? OPT was the largest telescope distributor in the world, and had been, I think their history was like 75 years. They started as a camera store and went into telescopes, and went basically more to telescopes than they did cameras. And all of a sudden in 2023, we're gone. We're out of business. We're auctioning everything off, and we're gone. So they're gone. I mean, it's it. And then all of a sudden in July this year, we see this in Sky and Telescope. The owners of Sky and Telescope from China said, you're done. And for you guys that don't know why this is a big deal, 2 years ago, and all these talks that we've done on how to buy, a beginner telescope, we would tell you, go to Orion Telescope, buy you either a tabletop or one of their nice Dobbs, because they're inexpensive and they're good telescopes. Orion's not here. They're gone. So the telescope market Orion for years, they had all kinds of telescopes, and all of a sudden they're gone. So everything changed. So when we started talking about doing this program, when I went back to check my PowerPoint, I can't use my PowerPoints anymore because all the telescopes that I have in there, examples, they're all gone. Refractors stay 8 and above unless you are wanting to do astrophotography serious, and you're serious about getting into that. So that is different in that respect. Visually, okay, so the Celestron here, the first one, has the same setup that this does, and it does work, only this is in a refractor. These are just some inexpensive refractors. They're all, there's some out azimuth, there's some equatorial. So they're inexpensive, but none of them have clock drives or anything. You're going to have to do everything manually. Reflectors, you have the tabletops, the Skywatcher tabletops. You have a 4.5 inch or a 5 inch there, and a 6 inch, or the 6 inch regular Dobbs, full tubes. You can see the prices on those. go up one level. You have the telescope here that I have in the bag. You have the Dobbs version of it. And then you have the 6-inch Dobbs version that has the same setup. They actually go up to a 10-inch that they all do the same thing, use a cell phone to find objects with. Then you have the Virtuoso. Those are full go-to. So you run those with your cell phone or an iPad, and when you say go, it goes to it, and it tracks once it gets there. I have seen one of these, but I have never used one. They had one when we were at the Texas Eclipse thing. Skywatcher was there and had one. So I looked at it, but I didn't see anybody using it, so I don't know how they work. I would say they work like the GTI, probably have the same drives in it. Going to a larger telescope, 8-inch, so you jump up in price. This telescope here, this top collapses down. They call it a flex tube. It just makes it a little bit smaller to store. Catadioptric. The telescope out on the very end is an AZ GTI mount. That is a full go-to mount. You run with your cell phone. I had one. Richard had
I had
one.
one.
Kevin had one.
I had that exact telescope with the Mescal.
So there's been a number of us who had those. That is a neat little mount, and it works, and it goes. It works. All I can say about the tripod is light. It's not shaky, but it is a light tripod. And if you're not careful, you can tip it over. I found that out because I almost tipped mine over one night. So what I did, I got a bucket with a lid on it, put some rock in it, bungee cord, put it on the ground, bungee cord around the tray, and it's amazing how much stabler that telescope is. But I sold mine to Tyler.
Still works great.
And it still works great. But it's a neat little mount, and it will hold up to 10 pounds, 11 pounds. Your SE mount Celestron, there's one below this, a 4-inch. Yes, it's less money, but I would not buy it. I've seen one, used one. I don't like it. It's just too small. The only thing I don't like about this mount is where they put the controller. It's just such a pain in the butt. I would rather have a controller like the CPC that you can stick in and it's out, and not having to try to get all the wire poked back in the arm. But those are very popular telescopes. They're inexpensive. The only difference in those and the last two, these are the newer upgrade, the Evolution style. The only difference is those you don't have a clutch. So my CPC, I can release clutches and I can manually move it for the first star and then lock it down. These, you have to drive it with the hand controller, which is not that big of a deal because all the other mounts we use, the AM5s and everything, you have to do that anyway. These are the newer versions that run Wi-Fi. They even have one that's a 9 1/4 inch. That's probably going to be the telescope I'm going to have to go to. So, where to buy? Who asked the question? Agena Astro, and this is not a complete list. Agena Astro, they took over OPT's website and mailing list and everything. They're a pretty big dealer out in California. They're nice because they don't charge shipping for anything. Astronomics, they're out of Norman, Oklahoma. They've been around for many, many years. They're a good distributor. High Point Scientific, the people I use out of New Jersey. Land, Sea, and Sky, they have some telescope suppliers or distributors or manufacturers that some of the other people don't have. They're out of Texas, and then Starzona out of Arizona. They're a big Celestron dealer, and they do other things, but The only camera store that I'm going to talk about is Woodland Hills Camera and Telescopes. And the only reason I put them in here is because, unlike some of the other camera stores that sell telescopes, they sell cameras and some telescopes. Woodland Hills sells cameras and telescopes. So when you see their booth at NEAF, it is a booth that is bigger than this room, and they have all kinds of telescopes. They have people there that can answer questions. So they're not just a camera store that sells a few telescopes. They sell cameras and telescopes. So they have both sides. So, but there's also, who you all buy? Cloud, what is it? Cloud something?
Cloud Break Optics.
Cloud Break.
Yeah, Cloud Break.
Cloud Break Optics.
Yeah.
In Oregon.
So that's another company. There's some others around, but though all these people are they specialize in telescopes. Okay, so don't call them. Don't call one of them and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about buying a telescope. What would you do? What would you buy? Help me out," and get their advice, and then go. Please don't go to Amazon and not buy from them, because they're in business. I mean, they're there to sell telescopes, because everybody that works for them, they're not a car dealer guy that's trying to sell telescopes. They are amateur telescopes users themselves. They're astrophotographers. They're, all those guys are neat guys, and they know their stuff. So let them help you. Anybody have questions? Or have I worn everybody out?
What should I buy next?
I'm sorry?
What should I buy next, Ralph? Rick, yes.
We have lots of members who have telescopes for sale.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for a telescope, you might want to, put it out there on Groups.io, or even just if you're looking for a telescope, let us know so we can point you in the right directions. So we've got some great telescopes in the club for sale.
We have
That's where I bought mine.
one telescope that I am refurbishing right now.
Hey, Ralph, if I had like a 20-inch Dobsonian, can I use that all the time and have great views of the planets? Or is there some other factor I have to consider every night when I look through it?
Well, some nights the planets aren't up.
Well,
Yeah.
sure.
Well,
And it's going to take an hour to set up.
Yeah.
It's
And
gonna
you're
be-
going to have the ladder to move around.
Here's something like seeing, right? Is there-
yeah. Well,
Seems-
like John said, you're going to have a ladder, because the 20-inch, your eyepiece is going to be up here.
I'm super tall.
I have, okay. With my 16-inch, you would be eye level with 16-inch. But I don't use my 16-inch on the planets. It just doesn't work good with the planets. Now, my 8-inch CPC, I love on planets. But my Dobbs, hey, it's great on deep sky stuff. I love it, especially on galaxies and things like that. But I hardly ever look at the planets through it.
Do you usually, even in your 8-inch, do you usually have to, wait, the CPC you said?
Mhm.
Okay. So I have a 6-inch reflector that I've tried to look at planets
What's
in.
your question about C? Yeah, sorry.
I have a 6-inch reflector that I've tried to look at planets in. And I've seen that even that's too bright, because planets are bright. So you have to cut down with a neutral density filter to actually see any detail in the planets
Yeah.
like that.
The club has one of these that was donated to us. I mean, this is old, years back. If you bought a cave telescope, that was it. I mean, they were the Cadillac way back in the 70s. A lady gave this to us, a 10-inch. It's in pretty decent shape. I'm going to fix it. Greg and I are going to put a motor on it. If anybody's interested in this, the only thing I would say is that it's big, it's heavy. I mean, it's not as big as a 20-inch. It's a 10-inch f7, but if you have a garage or somewhere that you can roll this telescope out of in your driveway, it'd be a great, or observatory where it's going to sit. It would be a great telescope. And the price could be right. So right now it's
And we're gonna have an 8-inch Dobsonian that's hand built. That's fantastic still. It's here. It's in our storage now. Ralph helped build the base for it, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Um,
It's in pieces at the moment.
and then possibly a 16-inch Dobsonian. So
Yeah.
Thank you, Ralph.
Yes, thank you.
That's what the mirror looked like when I got it.
so we're not.
That's a dirt dauber.
Thank you, Ralph.
Any of the good telescopes get better deals on Black Friday type deals.
I don't see that many on Black Friday, but
They just run the special.
there are specials like fall specials. Celestron does one. In fact, we just missed one of Celestron's. They've had a deal where you buy like the Evolution telescope, and they would give you the Star Sense, so it would do the alignment and everything for you. Threw it in for nothing. Skywatcher has deals like that too. They just went off.
Get on the mailing list.
Yeah.
They'll let you know.
Yeah, our High Point, they send newsletters out all the time. So I'm on their mailing list. I'm on a Gina mailing list.
On the smart telescopes, has anybody, has anybody heard what the next generation is going to be capable?
Lots of rumors.
Lots of rumors, but nothing concrete. They say Sea Stars, they're coming out with a larger one. You hear all kinds of different rumors, but haven't seen anything yet on Sea Star.
Actually, they're coming out with a smaller one, the S30, actually.
To combat the dwarf.
Yep.
Well, good.
So,
Dwarf is coming out with a brand new one also.
so what I found out about the dwarf versus the sea star is that the dwarf took 2 years just to do one update. I was told to stay away from the dwarfs because they're not updating appropriately, where the sea star updates all the time.
I don't know.
Well, that could be a bad thing, too.
Well, yeah, they haven't do updates yet
The
because they
thing to do, if
screwed.
you're looking for a telescope, find somebody with that telescope and then ask them questions about it. That's the best way to know if how they like it.
Richard is using a dwarf right now
Yeah, it's a Richard.
that Wes has let him borrow, and he's waiting on. I think they're coming out with a 3,
Yeah, the three coming out.
and he's waiting for that because he's had some good, and he's pleased with it.
One of the biggest advantages of the Dwarf and the Sea Star is they're so quick and easy to set up, and they're also very, very portable. You could take them on a weekend somewhere and have an astro imaging
Or
fix.
vacation. On the
Yeah.
airplane.
Yeah, because they're in case.
Yeah.
That I was hoping Kevin would bring his tonight.
You want to learn the night sky. Work your way around it so you know where the different objects are in the sky. Then I would say that the easiest way to do that is with the Dobson.
Yeah.
I started out with an pictorial, trying to find things, and it was so difficult to move the telescope to actually get to the point where I thought the object might be. I mean, that was, to me, it was just terrible.
Probably Kevin.
Well,
I mean, I built the Dobsonian mountain to go with the telescope.
You tell people to find people about that.
That made it easier to find things. You just push it there. And
Yeah.
Daytime.
well, they are.
Hey, Ralph.
Everybody
Thank you, Ralph.
daytime?
Yeah, I'm gonna hit the stop recording here.
You're good.
I've got the telescope on the moon up, and that looks damn good.